Hello folks, welcome back to the channel. Before we dive into today's story, I just want to take a moment to thank you all for 300 subscribers. I know, I've thanked you so many times before for your support, but honestly, the support has been so amazing that it's impossible not to mention it again. You've made this journey incredible, and I couldn't be more grateful. Also, in case you missed it, the 100 subscriber special is officially out. It's linked in the description below, so feel free to check it out after this video. Alright, now, let's dive into today's story. It started like most bad decisions do, with boredom and curiosity. I'm not some tech genius, or even someone who typically ventures into the weird corners of the internet. But that night, after scrolling aimlessly through my usual feeds, I found myself Googling dark web. I'd heard about it before, the shady underbelly of the internet where you can supposedly buy anything, no questions asked. Drugs, weapons, even hitmen. It always sounded more like urban legend than reality. Still, the idea of seeing it for myself, of peeking behind the digital curtain, was too tempting to ignore. After a bit of research, I downloaded a Tor browser. It felt surreal, almost like stepping into a forbidden realm. The sites I stumbled upon weren't as dramatic as I expected, mostly forums, marketplaces, and shady services that made me feel like I was one click away from an FBI raid. Then, I found it. A plain black website with white text. No fancy graphics or animations. Just the words, "The show must go on." Beneath it, a button, enter. I hesitated. Everything in me screamed that this was a bad idea. But the curiosity, the need to see what was behind the door, overpowered the little voice of reason in my head. I clicked. The page loaded slowly, the kind of lag that makes your heart race even if you don't know why. When it finally appeared, my screen filled with a live video feed. At first it was hard to make sense of what I was looking at. The camera was shaky, like someone was holding it by hand, and it seemed to be in a dimly lit room. I squinted, trying to make out the details. A man sat in a metal chair, his head hanging low. He was tied up, his wrists and ankles bound with duct tape. The more I stared, the more I noticed. Blood trickling down his temple, the shallow rise and fall of his chest. He was alive, but barely. Then the text appeared on the screen. "Welcome to the game. Guess right, and he lives. Guess wrong." My stomach churned. Was this some kind of sick joke? The video cut to a host, a man in a sharp black suit wearing a featureless white mask. He spoke, his voice distorted, almost robotic. "Welcome, contestants. Tonight's show promises to be unforgettable. Let's meet our victim. This is Greg. Greg has made some very bad choices in life, but tonight, his fate rests in your hands." A chat box popped up below the video, filled with hundreds of users typing furiously. They were laughing, cheering, betting. Then I saw my username. It was there in the chat. I hadn't signed in or created an account, but somehow, the site knew who I was. "Player 147, your turn." The host addressed me directly, and my blood ran cold. "Player 147, Greg's life is in your hands. Answer the question correctly, and he goes free. Get it wrong, and..." I didn't need him to finish. The question appeared on the screen. "What is the capital of Kazakhstan?" What? That's what this poor man's life depended on. I panicked, typing the first answer that came to mind. Astana. The host tilted his head, his mask reflecting the dim light. Final answer? Let's see if you're correct. The tension was unbearable. The chat exploded with comments, some mocking me, others rooting for Greg to die. Then a loud buzzer sound. Wrong. The camera panned back to Greg, and my stomach dropped as a masked figure stepped into the frame holding a knife. Wrong answer, player 147. Better luck next time. I couldn't look away as the figure plunged the knife into Greg's chest. His screams echoed in my headphones, cutting off abruptly as he slumped forward, lifeless. The host turned back to the camera. And the show must go on. I slammed my laptop shut, breathing heavily. My hands shook as I stared at the dark screen. What had I just witnessed? I thought about calling the police, but what could I even tell them? I stumbled onto a dark website, and now I'm an unwilling contestant in a murder game? Yeah, that would go over great. But when I opened my laptop again, the site was still there. The chat was still scrolling, my username still visible. A new message appeared at the top of the screen. You can't leave, player 147. The game isn't over. I tried closing the browser, uninstalling the Tor app, even shutting down my computer. But every time I restarted, the site was still there, waiting for me. The next night, I got an email. No sender, just a subject line. Be ready. I didn't open it, but it didn't matter. At exactly 9 p.m., the site loaded itself, replacing whatever I'd been looking at. The feed was live again. This time it was a woman in the chair. Her face was streaked with tears, her sobs muffled by a gag. The host appeared, addressing the audience. Contestants, let's welcome Claire to the game. Player 298, you're up next. I watched helplessly as another player failed the question, and Claire's life ended just like Greg's. But this time, something new happened. The host turned to the camera and said, Player 147, your turn is coming. Prepare yourself. The email hadn't been a coincidence. The moment I saw the message from the show, my stomach twisted into a knot. It was like they knew everything about me. The chat, the live feed, even my location. It all felt like an invisible hand was tightening its grip. I didn't know what to do. Calling the cops still seemed useless. How would I even explain this? How would I prove it? But doing nothing wasn't an option either. I tried reaching out to an old tech-savvy friend, James, hoping he could help me scrub my computer or track the source of the website. James wasn't the most reliable guy, but he'd always been good with computers. When I called, he sounded groggy, like I'd woken him up. What's going on, man? He mumbled. James, I need your help, I said, my voice shaking. I explained everything, from finding the site to watching the executions. There was a long silence on the other end before he finally said, Are you messing with me? Because if you are, this isn't funny. I'm serious, I snapped. I need you to check my computer or something. I don't know what's going on, but they're saying I'm a contestant in their game. James sighed. Fine. Bring your laptop over. But if this is some kind of prank, you owe me big time. I drove to James's apartment that same night, gripping my laptop like it was a bomb about to go off. When I got there, he looked half amused, half concerned, but he didn't say much as he set up his equipment. All right, he said, plugging in a USB device. Let's see what we're dealing with. For the next hour, I sat in silence, watching him type furiously and click through screen after screen of data I didn't understand. Occasionally, he muttered something under his breath, but he didn't share much. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. "This isn't good," he said. "What? What did you find?" "There's some seriously sketchy stuff on your computer, man. I don't even know how to explain it. It's like they've got a direct line to your system. They're not just watching you, they're controlling things. And the encryption, it's next level. Whoever these people are, they're pros." "So what do I do?" I asked, my voice trembling. James hesitated. "Honestly, you're screwed. I can try wiping your system, but I can't guarantee it'll work. And even if it does, there's no telling how far their reach goes. They might have your IP address, your personal info, everything." I felt like the walls were closing in. "There has to be something we can do." He sighed. "Let me dig a little deeper. Maybe I can find a way to block them or trace the source." I stayed at James's place that night, crashing on his couch. I didn't want to be alone. Around 9 p.m., my phone buzzed. My heart sank when I saw the notification. The show must go on. James was still at his desk, headphones on, engrossed in his work. I didn't want to bother him, so I opened the notification. The website loaded instantly, filling the screen with another live feed. This time, it wasn't just a random victim in the chair. It was James. I froze, my mind racing. Was this some kind of sick trick? I turned to look at him, but he was still there, oblivious, typing away. The host's voice crackled through the speakers. "Welcome back, player 147. Tonight's show is a little closer to home." I didn't understand what was happening. How could James be on the screen and in the same room as me? The camera feed zoomed in on the victim's face, and I realized with horror that it wasn't James. It was someone who looked exactly like him. "Your turn," the host said, and a question appeared on the screen. "How many bones are in the human body?" I knew the answer. I typed it out with shaking hands. 206. The host chuckled. "Correct. But don't relax just yet, player 147. The game is far from over." The masked executioner stepped forward anyway, driving a blade into the victim's chest. "No!" I screamed, slamming my laptop shut. But it didn't matter. The host's voice continued, distorted and hollow, echoing through the room. "See you tomorrow." James looked up, startled by my outburst. "What's wrong?" "They're here," I whispered, barely able to get the words out. "They're watching us." "What are you talking about?" I explained what had just happened, and for the first time, James looked genuinely scared. "This is worse than I thought," he said. "If they can project this kind of stuff directly onto your devices, we're dealing with some next-level hackers, maybe even government level." I didn't sleep that night. Every shadow, every noise made me jump. I kept thinking about the host's words. "See you tomorrow." The next day, I received another email. This time, it wasn't a warning or a countdown. It was a list of names, people I knew, family members, friends, co-workers. At the bottom of the email, a message: "Play the game, or they pay the price." I felt sick. This wasn't just about me anymore. These people had nothing to do with it, but their lives were being used as leverage. "James," I said, showing him the email. We have to do something. They're threatening my family. He nodded grimly. We'll figure it out. But we have to be smart about this. If we make the wrong move, we could make things worse. James and I decided to take drastic measures. If they had my name, my location, and the names of my family, there wasn't much time before something catastrophic happened. James believed he could trace the IP address of the email, at least narrow down where it was coming from. It's a long shot, he warned me. These people know what they're doing, but every system has vulnerabilities. I didn't have another option, so I let him work. I spent the next several hours pacing his apartment, the walls closing in around me. I kept checking the windows and double-checking the locks, convinced that someone was watching us. The email was still open on my phone, glaring back at me like a threat written in blood. My mom's name was at the top of the list. She had nothing to do with this nightmare, but these people didn't care. They want power, James muttered from across the room, his voice breaking the silence. Control. That's what this is all about. They scare you into playing their game because they know fear is the greatest motivator. Is there any way to stop them? I asked. Not yet, he said grimly. But I'm working on it. Around midnight, James called me over to his desk. He had several windows open, each one filled with indecipherable code and data. I found something, he said, pointing to one of the screens. A weak signal, bouncing between servers. I think it's part of their network. Can you shut it down? James shook his head. Not without drawing attention, but I can use it to trace their location, or at least figure out where the emails are coming from. It felt like a glimmer of hope, but my relief was short-lived. Before James could say anything else, the room went dark. What the? James started, but his voice was drowned out by the sound of his computer whirring to life again. The screen lit up, showing the familiar blood-red logo of the show. The host's voice echoed through the speakers, smug and mocking. You're getting too close, James. We can't have that, can we? The camera feed appeared on the screen. This time it was live footage of James sitting at his desk. What the hell? James whispered, looking around the room. They're watching us, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The host chuckled. Player 147, it seems you've recruited some help, but this isn't a team sport. If James continues to interfere, he'll become our next contestant, and trust me, you won't like the outcome. The screen went black, leaving us in silence. James was shaken, but he refused to give up. They're bluffing, he said, though I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. They're trying to scare us. They've already killed people, James, I reminded him. This isn't a bluff. But James was stubborn. He spent the rest of the night working on his computer, trying to outsmart an enemy that seemed impossible to beat. The next morning, I woke up to find him slumped over his desk, his face pale and his hands trembling. I've got something, he said, his voice hoarse. He showed me a map on his screen. It's not an exact location, but it's close. They're operating out of a server farm somewhere in the city. What do we do with that information? I asked. James hesitated. We could go there, shut it down ourselves. The idea terrified me, but I couldn't think of a better plan. If we could destroy their servers, maybe we could end this nightmare. That night, James and I drove to the address he'd found. It was a nondescript building on the outskirts of town, surrounded by chain-link fences and surveillance cameras. "This is it," James said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. We parked a block away and approached the building on foot. James had brought a crowbar, and I carried a flashlight, though I wasn't sure what good it would do. The building was eerily quiet as we slipped through a gap in the fence. The windows were blacked out, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel beneath our feet. Inside, the air was cold and sterile. Rows of servers filled the room, their lights blinking like eyes in the darkness. "This is it," James whispered. "We shut these down, and we shut them down." But before he could do anything, the speakers crackled to life. "Welcome, Player 147, the host's voice said, dripping with malice. "You've brought a friend, I see. How charming." A red countdown appeared on one of the screens, 5 us. "What is that?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "It's a trap," James said, his face pale. "We have to get out of here." But before we could move, the door slammed shut behind us. The countdown hit 0, and the room was filled with a deafening hum. James and I braced ourselves, expecting an explosion. But nothing happened. Instead, the screens lit up with a new message. "You're free to go for now." The door opened, and we didn't waste any time. We ran as fast as we could, not stopping until we were back in the car. I wanted to believe it was over, but deep down I knew it wasn't. They'd let us go, but it wasn't out of mercy. It was a game to them, and we were just pawns. I moved to a new city, changed my name, and cut ties with everyone I knew, but the fear never left me. Every time I saw a dark alley or heard a strange noise, I wondered if they'd found me. James tried to move on too, but he wasn't the same. Neither of us was. I still think about the people who didn't escape, the contestants who didn't make it. I wonder how many more there are, trapped in the same nightmare, waiting for their turn on the show. And every time I open my email, I hold my breath, terrified of seeing that blood-red logo again.